Airsoft bolt actions are becoming almost more popular than drum mags these days, and with some great out-the-box products now available, this video will cover one of the most important things you'll need for them. That is of course a scope. Coming up will be some of the options you might want to go for when looking for a scope, along with a short guide on how to set them up. So let's get into it. I picked these 4 scopes to show a variety of options available in the same range of specifications, namely the 2-7x32. Why these specs? There are other scopes with higher magnifications like this 3-9 or this 4-16, and these would work just fine for airsoft, but seeing as this is a comparison video I needed to narrow it down. Personally, I do prefer the 2-7x32, and this is the scope that I now use, and I'll get into why in a bit, but prior to this I was using the 4-16x44 and I got along just fine with it. If however you just want an optic that looks cool or are trying to replicate a certain build, then go for that. This video is more about what has a practical application for airsoft. With that in mind, let's take a look at the image quality of these scopes by doing a blind comparison test. Unless you know the reticle, there's no way of telling which one is which. Each scope was filmed at the same time of day with the same camera settings, and all are set to ×4 magnification. Which of the 4 scopes you see here do you think gives the best image? For now, I'll just number them. After watching back the footage myself, I saw there was very little difference. Number 4 did seem a little blurry, but unless you're watching this on a big screen, it's really going to be impossible to see. To try and stretch their capabilities, I did try and film them as the light was disappearing to see if some of them performed better than others. Just a quick note on number 4, because of the shorter eye relief it had to the others, I had to adjust its position to the camera, and as a result the reticle was put out of focus. This would never be an issue for you as the user. If I had to rank them myself, I would say that number 2 gives a slightly more clear image in the brighter settings. It seems to be less saturated than the others, though it's pretty close to number 3. In low light conditions though, number 3 etched just ahead I would say of number 2. Number 1 suffered a bit in the low light conditions, noticed the chromatic aberration above the whiteboard, and number 4 really started to blur in the low light, though in brighter settings it seemed pretty close behind the others. Do you agree with these observations? Let me know in the comments what you think. Before I reveal which ones are which, it's vital to note here that there are probably some limitations to this test. The main one being myself as the cameraman, and just the way that the scope looks through a camera compared to your eye. From personally looking down these myself, I would say that the footage here gives a pretty fair impression of what it actually looks like. Number 1 is the Vector Optics Matiz, number 2 is the Leupold VX Freedom, number 3 is the Vortex Crossfire, and number 4 is the Wulf Fireball. And now you want to know the prices. At the time of this recording, the Vector Optics Matiz is £63, the Leupold VX Freedom is £330, the Vortex Crossfire is £126, and the Wulf Fireball is £56. Because of the nature of this video, it's important to disclose any relationships I have with any of the brands of scopes shown in this video. Right off the bat, I'm not affiliated or sponsored with any of the brands. I genuinely don't think they know who I am or care. However, I was sent the Wulf Fireball and the Vector Optics Matiz to me by Optics Warehouse in the UK, and these will be going back to them after this review. They asked me to give an honest take on which scope I would use for airsoft, and that's exactly what I'll be doing. Hopefully the image test you saw earlier can give you an unbiased view. The Leupold is a scope that I paid for with my own money, and the Vortex Crossfire is from my friend Sniper Mechanic Dan, who kindly lent it to me for this review. So why is image quality important? I hear over and over again people online saying you don't need a good scope, it's just airsoft. There is certainly a lot of truth in this. Many of the high-end real steel scopes come with features that are completely unnecessary for airsoft. Image quality, I would argue though, is an important thing, because it lets you see where the BBs are actually landing. Take a look at these long shots. Notice how far above the target I'm aiming? I knew I had to aim here because the shots I took before these hits either fell short or the wind took them. I'd only be able to make these kind of shots if I knew exactly where that BB was landing. At these kind of ranges, you are going to be right on that margin of not being able to see that tiny plastic 6mm ball. Talking of margins, yes, one scope may only have a marginally better image than another, but it's in these margins where seeing or not seeing the BB is going to materialise. Having said that, I started airsofting with this £20 second-hand scope from eBay, and I got along just fine with it. Yeah, the quality is not great, but as an aiming device, you are certainly going to be able to pick up your targets, but being able to see the BB beyond 50 metres is kind of difficult. Why did I go for a Leupold? Well, it was almost half the weight of my previous scope, the Vortex Viper HS 4-16, For me personally, I do really appreciate a lightweight setup. Saving 300 grams doesn't sound like a lot, but at a 3-day milsim when you're carrying this around in your hands all day, you do start to appreciate it. Leupold are famous on the market for producing some of the most lightweight optics available. This shouldn't be a big minus though to the other 3 scopes in this review. 2-7x32 scopes are all going to be pretty lightweight compared to scopes in other higher magnifications. I know some guys are the opposite to this and say that having a heavyweight setup adds a realistic feel, but to be honest that's just not my thing. A scope that is lightweight probably is going to be not as strong as a heavy one, but having used scopes for 10 years in Airsoft, I've only ever broken one of them. From reading online reviews, it seems that under the £50 range you can get issues with holding zero, but personally I've never seen this. As Airsofters, we of course are used to things breaking and not working how they should, but scopes come from the real steel market, and the casing, the outside structure, is always going to be made out of solid metal. Red dots definitely are vulnerable to BB impacts and you will want to protect the lens. However, a scope's objective lens is a thick piece of glass, and to my knowledge I've never heard of one breaking from BB impacts. Here is a test on an old scope that I'll never use. I'm shooting 0.48 at 2.3 joules. Yes, there are other ways of damaging a scope, and if you're concerned with that, then a warranty may be a good idea for you. Out of the 4 in this review, the best warranty of course has to go to Vortex. They will even replace a red dot if it's been shot out by a BB, and still to this day I don't understand how they can make this work as a business model. It's frankly insane. However, after researching Leupold's warranty, it seemed that there was very good feedback from the community. Officially on the website it does say that they don't cover accidental damage, but after talking to the community online and also talking to their UK distributor, it seemed that they do replace and repair products from accidental damage. The Wulf optics, although it's only £56, is covered for accidental damage, which is pretty neat. The Vector optics, however, is not covered, although if there is a factory defect you can still return it. Now for some shooting. By the way, these shots were filmed on my MTW as I couldn't get this camera set up to work on my bolt action. Another reason I picked the Leupold, the reticle. This is probably something I'm overly fussed about, but I do find that when you have a wide crosshairs and you're perfectly zero, the BB is often obscured by the crosshairs. Sure, it comes into view at some points, but when you aren't holding steady, shooting at a light background, you're in low light conditions, and the BB is appearing and disappearing behind the crosshairs, it distracts the eye, in my opinion. Out of the 4 scopes, the Leupold has the finest reticle. Then it's the Vector optics, then the Crossfire, and then the Wulf. Is having a very fine reticle a deal breaker? Probably not, but it's something you might want to consider. But image quality isn't everything when it comes to scopes. How do they compare when it comes to eye relief? Eye relief is the range of distance you can hold your eye away from the scope while maintaining a clear sight picture. A good eye relief will make it easier for you to scope up and shoot from unconventional shooting positions. I did try and do some testing on this by sliding the scopes up and down the rail and measuring the distances, but after reviewing the footage I had to scrap the test as I realised I wasn't perfectly aligned behind the camera. From having had these scopes and using them pretty extensively throughout the making of this video, I would say that they're all pretty close to each other. The Wulf's eye relief is closer to the eyepiece than the others, but this is no bad thing. All you would need to do is move it a bit closer on the rail to your eye. The only thing you might sacrifice here is a bit of situational awareness. Given my testing on this was kind of flawed, I will just have to rely on what the manufacturers said was the eye relief on their websites. Some of these are not a range of distance, but yeah, that's all that was on their website. The other feature that will make it easier to find that clear image is the eye box. This is basically how far off you can hold your eye from the eyepiece, left, right, up and down, while maintaining a clear sight picture. Filming a comparison of this was impossible. From personally using these, there really wasn't much in it. I would say that once you've gotten used to a scope, you will become accustomed to that particular eye relief or eye box, so I wouldn't get too hung up on this spec. By the way, all scopes in this video are set to 4x magnification. After speaking to some of the Airsoft community, it seemed people tend to stick in the low magnifications, normally something like 3 or 4 times. Not much to say here apart from you might want to stick to the same magnification throughout the day, as you'll be able to judge distances more easily like this. Another way to do it is to have 2 settings that you are accustomed to, say 2 and 5 times. At 2 times you'll be able to get onto target much quicker, and then when you've got a bit more time and you want to take that perfect shot, 5 times can be good. If you're changing magnification a lot, you can get these clip-on scope levers to make turning the dial very fast. I use these on all my LPVOs like shown here. By the way, I may do a separate video on LPVOs if you guys are interested. Another advantage of the 2-7x32 as a platform, as opposed to other scopes with different magnification ranges, is the small objective lens of 32. It kind of solves a problem that isn't immediately apparent when first starting out, and it took me a while to even realise this was a thing. Having a small front end to the scope means that you can mount it as low down to the barrel as possible. Why is this a good idea, I hear you ask? So here is a scope looking through a bush. You have to imagine this is 3D, but yeah, 2D, whatever. If you can see the target, it doesn't mean you can hit it because the barrel is actually pointing at a leaf. Mounting the scope lower down will close this gap between the crosshairs and the barrel. But silly Ghillie, you're so silly, why don't you just not shoot the leaf? The problem is that when you're focused on looking down the scope, you completely forget this. It's an issue I still constantly run into, and many of the guys that have played a lot with the bolt action will tell you that clipping twigs is one of the main causes of missing. Having a small objective lens is only going to reduce the gap by a little, but I have found it does make a difference for me. What's more important for this setup is that you find some low mounted scope rings. If you're mounting on a VSR or TAC-41, you have a step down from the rail to the barrel, and you can go for rings that sit as low as they can go. These particular ones I found are 4.3mm. If however you're mounting on a continuous rail like on a modified Scout or an SRS, you will need ones that are a bit higher. These ones are 8.6mm, and with the 32mm objective lens they clear it. Note, the Wulf Fireball has a slightly bigger objective lens because it has a parallax adjuster on the front, so you will need scope rings that are slightly higher. I don't have any for an example. Just a quick note on the parallax adjuster. This has two functions. One, it aligns the crosshairs to the same focal plane as what you're looking at. This is really only going to apply for real steel as the effects are minuscule when you're talking about airsoft. The second thing it does is it puts certain objects in focus at different distances. However, at 4 to 5 times magnification, most objects will appear in focus anyway. Out of the 4 scopes, the Wulf is the only one that has it. Personally, I wouldn't worry about this feature. On a SRS, a low mounted scope may cause issues, as the cheek rest sits at the same level as the rail. On all scope setups, you ideally want a fabric face mask to make scoping up easier. Lone Star Tactical are ideal for this. They provide protection for only your mouth and don't sit over your cheeks. If you're not fussed with protection, a balaclava is just fine as well. A big mesh mask or an all-in-one mask like this is not what you want. Another spec that may be of interest to you is the field of view. Not really much to say here, it is what it is. The field of view is how much of an area is in view. Here is a comparison. A larger field of view is obviously going to give you better awareness and let you find your target faster. They are all pretty close to each other on this, but for some reason it seems that the Vortex on 4 times magnification seems to have a slightly smaller field of view. My guess is that it's actually not times 4 magnification, and you might want to back off to 3 times to get that bigger field of view. Whilst we're talking of awareness, another thing to mention is the size of the scope body, as this is going to obstruct your peripheral vision. There's some pretty massive differences here actually, and surprisingly the Vector optics did the best out of the 4 on this. It was closely followed by the Leupold, and then the Vortex and the Wulf both have a pretty large scope body. Other advice I can give on scopes is buy from a reputable dealer. I of course have to give a shout out to Optics Warehouse. I purchased my Vortex and thermal scope from them, and they went out their way to make sure I had the right reticle and the right scope rings after I told them my setup. So before I get on to the setting up of a scope, I'll give some brief final thoughts on the scopes shown in this review. The image tests I think show that just because you pay double for an optic, it doesn't mean you get double the performance. It's nothing like that. Yes, there's an argument for having that sort of marginal improvement, as it's going to help you track your BBs, but other factors like lighting, are you shooting at a dark background, etc., probably have more of an impact on seeing that BB than if your scope has excellent image quality. If the Vector optics had that really thin reticle, then I think it would be an awesome scope for airsoft, but I'm probably overfussed about that feature. Yes, the Leupold has that thin crosshairs, but I use that scope every Sunday, and I've chosen to go fully into the whole sort of bolt action Ghillie roll. But if I was just dipping my toe in and I didn't really know if I was going to like it or not, I'd probably be going for the Vector optics or the Wulf. The Vector optics, yeah, doesn't come with the best warranty, but that's about it. The image quality is decent, and the other thing that I can't really show on camera is that sort of initial first look down the scope. I was kind of immediately impressed with it when I saw it. If you're concerned with damage, then the Wulf optics may be the option for you. As the cheapest in the lineup, it certainly packs a punch in the brighter settings compared to the others. Bear in mind though that if you're playing in woods under the canopy in the summer, it can get a bit dark, so having that brighter image is really going to help you. There were some noticeable differences here between the two inexpensive scopes and the two higher end ones. This leads of course to the Vortex. It's probably a good enough reason alone to get a Vortex because of the brighter image, but you also have to give it to Vortex for offering the best warranty. Most of the airsoft community, especially the bolt action users, will certainly have heard of Vortex, and they're definitely the most established brand in this review. Because of my personal experience, I wasn't really that concerned with the warranty, as I've never had issues damaging scopes. Going for the Leupold probably was overkill. It really came down to the reticle and the fact that it was so lightweight. Would I recommend it? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. Fine reticles, low mounts or excellent glass quality are great and everything, but it doesn't matter what you have if you don't have them set up correctly. First off, aligning the scope perfectly vertical. I would say 75% of the people whose scopes I looked through at the game have their crosshairs slightly canted. Having a scope perfectly aligned will help with the problem unique to Airsoft, hop up. For those that don't know, hop up is the thing that puts backspin on your BB to help it go further using the Magnus effect. To make things simple for now, let's just say it makes the BB go up. However, if you have your setup tilted just a tiny bit, the hop will make the BB fly slightly sideways. If you're using an AEG, this isn't really going to be an issue, as you can just walk the BBs onto the target. But with a bolt action, because you're cocking the bolt each time to take a shot, you can't just slowly move your barrel over to direct shots. The BB ideally needs to be going through the crosshairs every time. Having your crosshairs perfectly vertical will give you that indication you need that you're perfectly level. If you're just starting out, you might also want to look at getting a spirit level that clips onto the scope like this. Over time, you'll be able to feel intuitively whether your scope is canted or not. To get the crosshairs perfectly vertical, put the scope in its rings, slightly tighten it to the point where you can still adjust it, and move your head away from the setup, like this. From this angle, line up the stock and the bolt with the crosshairs until it's vertical. Another way of doing it is to get a flat tool. For this, I'm just using calipers. Place them underneath the scope on the flat rail and twist the tool upwards. This will align the flat bottom of the scope, this bit here, with the rail. When it comes to tightening the scope rings, don't overdo it. You can squish the tube and damage the internals of the optic. Unless you want to buy a torque wrench, my advice would be apply the same amount of pressure to the Allen key as you do opening a can of Coke. Now to zeroing the scope. But before we do this, we need to set the hop. Doing it in this order is really important. To set the hop, go into the game zone or the shooting range and look down the side of the barrel while shooting at a dark background. Don't try and look down the scope while setting the hop, as you won't be able to see what the flight path is doing from this angle. There are two hop settings that people like to go for. The first is what I would call a dead flat, and this is what I go for. It was a very windy day when I was filming this, so yeah, my BBs aren't flying straight at all here. Ideally you want to try and do this in calm conditions. A dead flat hop setting is where the BB comes out the barrel, flies straight to whatever distance your setup can achieve and then drops. My setup can achieve 150 airsoft meters. For those that don't know, an airsoft meter is like a real meter but with less centimeters. The other setup some guys go for is a little flick at the end of the flight path. The advantage to this is that you do, yes, get a bit of extra range, but it does have a few disadvantages that affect accuracy. Imagine your line of sight through the crosshairs. BB is going to be travelling through the crosshairs for a longer period of time. If you're overhopping it with a flick, you kind of get this gap between where you're actually aiming and where the BB is flying. At this distance, yeah, you've probably got equal chance of hitting with both of them, but actually using a bolt action, I would say most of your shots happen within the 30 meter to 60 meter range, just because most game sites, that's the kind of line of sight you're most likely to get. And with this setup, you have this big gap here. Now that obviously on paper doesn't look like it's going to be an issue, but it does. This means if you're zeroed at the apex of your flight, say 70 meters, anything closer than that, and you will have to aim higher than the target. It makes a difference, and if you're trying to hit people behind barriers, say there's like someone's behind a barrier here and their head's poking up. I don't know why this is funny, but it is. So say there's someone here. If you're coming at him from like below, going upwards, you are going to really struggle to hit him. My little stick man. So yeah, you get the idea. Like we talked about before with clipping twigs, this idea of having a dead flat hop is really going to help with this issue as well. And I'd actually say it's a more important thing to get right than having a low mounted scope. Once you have a hop setting that you like, you can zero the scope. Not much to say here. Anti-clockwise on the dials is up and right, and clockwise is down and left. Try to get it zeroed at the apex of the flight. Bear in mind that because you're zoomed in, your shots are going to appear slightly more inaccurate than if you were using iron sights or a red dot. Unfortunately, this is just part of AIRSOFT. Finally, eye protection. One thing to consider for those guys wearing mesh is that it does affect your eyesight quite a bit while looking down a scope. And if you can find a way to use clear glass goggles and avoid fogging with a Ghillie, it's really going to help this issue a lot. Thanks for watching. I don't normally make these kind of videos, but I thought this would help a lot of the people starting out. I sometimes hear people saying you shouldn't start with a bolt action and all that. Yeah, it takes a bit of time to get used to, and setting up the bolt action along with the scope is certainly a process that you have to learn. It is, however, very satisfying when you get that long shot and you can see the BB flying through the air and hitting that target. So I would recommend it to anyone thinking of doing it.